Okay, hello, welcome to a series of 3 revision videos updating you on the key topic of government subsidy, a form of intervention in a market. We have 3 videos. The first one is going to take a look at some examples of subsidies. Then we'll work our way in the second video through the analysis diagrams that you might want to use to get top marks in assessments. And then thirdly, we will evaluate the impact of government subsidies. So first of all, what is a subsidy? I think the best definition is that a subsidy is any type, any form of financial assistance offered to businesses by the government. And also occasionally directly to consumers. And a subsidy to a producer tends to reduce the marginal cost of supply. It brings down the costs of supplying extra units to the market. Normally, a government subsidy leads to an increase in the output sold of a good or service and at a lower price. And indeed, the price going down is the catalyst for an extension of demand. So some examples of government subsidies, first of all, to producers. Recording this in the early months of 2021, and in many countries, the governments have introduced wage subsidy schemes or job retention programs for furloughed workers during the pandemic to try to maintain employment and prevent mass unemployment. The government might also offer some grants, some financial support for businesses who take on youth unemployed, which is particularly high in many countries, or indeed the long-term jobless, people who've been out of work for at least 1 year. In many countries, you will see state aid on offer for loss-making enterprises. It could be a loss-making airline, a train operating company that needs a subsidy to maintain services, bus businesses, and perhaps a steel plant. If you search the news, you will find examples of governments offering different types of state aid. And increasingly in the housing sector, affordability of housing has become an issue. So some governments bringing in subsidies for building companies to build more affordable housing. Other countries might offer producers an export subsidy. They're trying to encourage firms to sell their goods and services overseas. They might offer them a minimum price for doing that. So those are examples of government subsidies to producers. Occasionally, we also get, quite a few examples coming up, but we get examples of where the government tries to impact demand by offering a subsidy, if you like, directly to the consumer. Good example in recent times is a wide number of countries offering subsidies for people buying a new electric vehicle, either a fully electric or a hybrid vehicle, trying to wean them off petrol and diesel. Feed-in tariffs for energy fed back into the grid by households. I'll give you an example of that in a second. Many countries, particularly where incomes are lower per capita, governments offer food and energy subsidies. About 10 years ago, the UK government, in the last recession, brought in a boiler scrappage scheme designed to get people to replace their old energy inefficient boilers with newer versions, partly on environmental grounds, but also partly to increase demand, stimulate production. Free television licences for the over 75s. The Scottish government in 2021 brought in a new legal duty on councils to ensure that free items such as tampons and sanitary pads are made freely available to anyone who needs them. That's a subsidy. It's basically a subsidy in kind, ensuring that these key products are available for people to use. The government also offers some tax-free childcare. And that again is a type of subsidy. It's a form of financial support. So the job retention scheme, the furlough scheme, probably the best example at the moment of a very extensive and expensive subsidy. The UK scheme, the furlough scheme, has been in operation since March 2020, and it provides grants to businesses to ensure that they can retain furloughed staff and continue to pay them despite the impact of the pandemic. A lot of countries, as we've said, provide a subsidy to consumers, a discount on the price of new low emissions electric vehicles. The government gives the grants to vehicle dealerships and manufacturers who then pass it on to the consumer. I think in the UK up to £3,000 has been available for electric car purchase. Feed-in tariff is quite interesting. So feed-in tariff is where people install solar panels on their roofs, for example, as pictured. They essentially become their own energy generating company, and any surplus energy that their capabilities produces can be fed back into the grid. So feed-in tariff is basically the price the government's willing to pay for small-scale renewable electricity generation technologies, where households and businesses and organisations, could be a school, for example, could be a college, any surplus energy gets fed back into the grid, and you get a price for that. And the feed-in tariff is designed to stimulate people buying solar panels and installing small wind turbines. State aid is where the government offers direct grants to cover losses and things. And of course, during the pandemic, a lot of businesses have suffered badly in retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. They've had to close down during lockdown, and the government's offered, billions of pounds of aid in that sense, although there's a big question about whether that's going to be enough. Another really good example, we're going through lots of examples in this video, hope they're useful, are the subsidies provided to the arts. This is the Arts Council England subsidy by genre, if you like, by art form. Theatre and music are the biggest recipients, over £114 million of subsidy for theatre and visual arts and dance and other forms. So quite a lot of subsidy goes into the arts. Here's a really good example of a food subsidy in Lebanon, of course, badly hit recently by the disaster at the port. The Lebanese central bank has been providing foreign currency to importers of flour and fuel. Well, they've been providing that foreign currency at a favourable rate, which essentially brings down the cost of importing flour and fuel, and hopefully gets passed on to consumers. There's a fear that subsidy is unsustainable, and that prices, of course, of basic foods would have to go up. Lebanon imports the vast majority of its food and fuel. Here's another good example from India. The Punjabi government deciding to shut down a facility of free Wi-Fi to get rid of an expensive subsidy. If you take fossil fuel subsidies, many countries do offer essentially a fuel subsidy to their industries and things. China is the biggest, $38 billion of fuel subsidy in 2017. India, just under half that. And in France, this is quite an interesting chart. France, of course, part of the Common European Agricultural Policy. French farms heavily reliant on subsidy. This chart simply shows the percentage of farms in France receiving a subsidy in 2017. And obviously, if it's 100%, that's all farms. And you can see in many industries, from mixed cattle to cattle milk to cereals and oilseeds, 100% of farms received some form of subsidy in 2017. I guess one of the ways you could contrast this is by thinking about a country like New Zealand, where the amount of subsidy for farming has been vastly reduced over the years. The UK, of course, now has left the European Union. We've left the CAP. And the big question is the future. What future will there be for subsidies for English, Welsh, Scottish farmers and things in the years to come? Okay, so in this first video, I've taken you through lots of examples of subsidies. Hopefully you've got some good examples for your assessment notes. In the next video, we'll work our way through step by step the analysis diagrams to show how a subsidy works. Okay, thank you.